Hello everyone. This will be a special Chanukah edition. We will actually go back to the first parak, the third Mishnah. There was an insight I read in Rav Bernstein's Chanukah Sefer that I thought shared a really beautiful idea, a nice way of kind of tying off Chanukah as we are on the last eighth day, and that will help us tie into the rest of the year. And that is to say, on Chanukah we speak a lot about the Torah perspective against the Greek perspective, this idea of Judaism, a Torah worldview versus a kind of more Hellenistic worldview. And what does that mean? So it's often kind of portrayed Torah versus philosophy. But there's something else going on that Rav Bernstein points out, and that is our religions. That is to say, Judaism famously propagates the idea of one God, right? There we are monotheistic, as opposed to the Greeks and obviously much of ancient culture, which was polytheistic, right? They had multiple deities, they had several deities, they had dozens, hundreds of deities. And often the way you'll kind of hear this spoken about now, I know it definitely took perhaps not a large role, but it was certainly spoken about many times in A Song of Ice and Fire, or more commonly known as A Game of Thrones, a famous fantasy series that was made into a TV show. This idea of the God of a thousand faces. That is to say, all these cultures, they all have their different conceptions of deities, they call them different names, they look different, but ultimately it really comes down to the same thing, right? The God of a thousand faces just means same thing, different name, different look, different color, different whatever, but it's really the same thing. And that's really not, strictly speaking, true at all, as we will see. The idea of being a monotheist versus a polytheist presents a completely different attitude towards one's deity. Now, what does that mean? The Greeks were polytheistic. They had multiple deities. And what happens is when a person when a person subscribes to multiple deities, then each deity has their specific function, right? In terms of there will be the deity of Parnasa, right? Of a livelihood, of war, of safe travel, of bearing children. You name it, there's a deity for it. And when a person wants something, a success in a certain arena, they will turn to that deity and bring offerings to that deity. And the benefit here is that the deity, now obviously being one of many, is almost competing with the other deities, right? For control, for followers, for worshippers. So by a person presenting that offering, they are empowering that deity, and in return, the deity will then go and grant that person's wishes. Sometimes, maybe. And so the way it goes is this is really a benefits-oriented relationship in terms of the worshipper doesn't. If the worshipper is looking for success in war, and assuming they're not married or they have enough children, they're not going to care about the deity of children or of motherhood. So there's no interaction there. It's completely total disinterest. Listen, I need to succeed in this. I need to succeed in this area, and that's what I'm turning my attention to. That's a polytheist. And by the way, if that deity does not respond, then I'm going to take my offerings and I'll bring them to somebody else, a deity who can actually help me accomplish my goals. And so it's very much, there's no focus on the relationship itself. If I need a deity, then I'll pay attention. If I don't, then I don't care. As a monotheist, the way Jews view God is, first, there is only one God, which means there's no one else to turn to. And moreover, God doesn't need us. He's not competing for our attention, right? In terms of there's one God and that's it. It's not like, oh, you're choosing some other God. There's nowhere else to go. So what happens is the focus totally changes. In terms of we will obviously go and beseech God for what we would like, what we need, what interests us, and then we see his response. Now what happens is because he does not need us, this isn't a benefits-oriented relationship. He's not looking for anything from us. And so as a result, it's not about what he's looking from us because he doesn't need anything from us. It's what he's looking for us in terms of he wants the best for us. He actually cares about us. He wants to have a relationship with us. That's the Jewish conception of God. God wants us to follow his mitzvahs and learn his Torah, not in order for him to now suddenly be empowered. He doesn't need that. He wants us to come to know him for the relationship itself. That's the goal. And that's a completely different view than a polytheistic one in terms of there's no interest in having a relationship with a worshiper for the sake of that relationship. There's something else going on there, and that's totally different from Judaism. Now, how do we see that? We see that in the first parak of the third Mishnah of Pirkei Avot. What does it say? So Antigonus ish Socho kibel Shimon HaTzadik. Antigonus ish Socho received from Shimon HaTzadik. Hu haya omer. Antigonus would say, Al tihiu ka'avadim hamishamshim et harav al menas lekabel pras. do not be like the servants who serve the master in order to receive a reward. Right? Rather be like the servants who serve the master not on condition of receiving the reward. Now it's interesting to think about, asks Rav Bernstein, why is this what Antigonus decided to teach at that time? And in answer he says, keep in mind that Antigonus came after Shimon HaTzadik, who's the generation after. And the Gemara records a very famous incident between Shimon HaTzadik and Alexander the Great, when Alexander landed on the beaches, or at least was in Israel, and met Shimon HaTzadik, which means that Antigonus, being a generation after Shimon HaTzadik, was also a generation after the Greeks were in Israel. By that point, the Hellenizing Greeks had already made some inroads into Israel. And so what happened was, even among the Jews who did not subscribe to the Greek religion, right, Jews who remained monotheistic, that Greek culture started to kind of seep into their worldview in terms of they start to look at God and they're like, all right, God, I need you to give me certain physical success. I would like to have some material success and pleasures in this world. And that's what I'm looking for in terms of when I'm engaging in my worship of you. I'm expecting a certain kickback, if you will. And so that's why Antigonus Irsocho was saying that's not at all what this is about in any way, shape, or form. We do not serve God in order to receive a reward. We serve God in order to, with no seeking of benefits, because that's what a relationship looks like. If a person enters a relationship or enters a marriage, be like, all right, there's going to be a whole stack of, there's a whole list of things that I'm looking to get from this relationship, then chances are that relationship is doomed to fail, or at least become extremely contentious and unpleasant, because as those things may not be met. But if a person is just engaging in the relationship for the sake of the relationship, then that's a totally different level. And that's what Judaism values. That's something that was foreign to the Greeks and something that ultimately was part of what we went to war about. Not only back in those days, but also in our times. So that's the idea that we'll share for Chanukah. That is what's going to help lead us into the rest of the year. And we'll see you next time. We'll be back on track with the second Pirkei and second Mishnah.